There are towns in this country where your chance of being a crime victim is 1 in 11 per year. Towns where security firms issue written warnings telling employees not to stop after dark. Towns where the FBI data reads like a misprint, and it's not. I spent weeks going through uniform crime reports, EPA emergency declarations, and congressional investigation records. What I found were 10 places where the locals all say the same thing. Don't stop. Keep driving. Get gas somewhere else. I didn't believe the numbers at first either. Here's the thing. You won't find these warnings on Google Maps. You won't see a red flag pop up on your GPS when you pull off the interstate. The information exists in FBI uniform crime reports, in EPA emergency declarations, in congressional investigations, but it's scattered across databases that no casual traveller ever checks. The locals know. They've always known. And if you ask them, most will tell you the same thing. Fill up before you get there, and don't pull over once you're in. This isn't one town with a bad reputation. It's a pattern. 10 places across the United States where the data, violent crime rates, contamination records, opioid shipment logs, tells a story that your navigation app never will. And in some of these places, the danger didn't come from outside. It came from the systems that were supposed to be keeping people safe. Let's start driving. The smell hits you first. Or at least, it used to. For decades, the Great Southern Lumber Company, and later Crown Zellerbach, and then Georgia Pacific, ran a massive paper mill in Bogalusa, Louisiana. A mill so central to the town's identity that the place was literally built around it. The streets fanned out from the mill, the houses were mill housing, the paychecks came from the mill, and the air, thick, sulphurous, unmistakable, was the smell of employment, of a working-class town that had a reason to exist. Then the mill closed, and when it did, Bogalusa didn't just lose a factory, it lost the entire economic organism that had been keeping roughly 10,000 people fed, housed, and busy. The tax base collapsed, the young people left, and what moved into the vacuum was something far worse than unemployment. Violent crime in Bogalusa now runs approximately 3 times the national average. Total crime sits 152% above the US mean. Washington Parish, the parish where Bogalusa is the largest town, has become one of Louisiana's most consistently dangerous areas, and Louisiana is already a state that regularly tops national crime rankings. So when you layer Bogalusa's numbers on top of a state that's already extreme, you're looking at a place where the math is genuinely grim. Aggravated assault is the most common violent offence, and it's not the kind of violence that hides. It spills into gas stations, into parking lots, into the intersections where people are just passing through. The poverty rate in Bogalusa is punishing, well above both state and national figures, and poverty here isn't theoretical or abstract, it's visible. Boarded storefronts along Columbia Street, houses with collapsing porches and blue tarps where roofs should be, vacant lots where businesses used to stand, now overgrown with kudzu so thick it looks intentional, like the land is trying to erase what was there. The landscape around Bogalusa is dense Louisiana bottomland, pine forests, creeks, swamp edges where the Bogalusa Creek winds through flat terrain that gets soggy every time it rains. In another context, this could be beautiful country, quiet, green, remote enough to feel like an escape. But Bogalusa isn't remote by choice. It's remote because everything that could leave, did leave. The nearest city of any size is Hattiesburg, Mississippi, about an hour north. New Orleans is roughly 70 miles south. Bogalusa sits in between, connected by 2-lane state roads that wind through nothing much. The honest drawback here, beyond the crime, is that the economic collapse isn't recovering. There's no tech company scouting Bogalusa for a new campus. There's no tourism pipeline. The infrastructure that made the town viable was a single industry, and when that industry left, it took the future with it. Locals who remain describe a place where the options have narrowed to the point of suffocation. Some stay because they own property they can't sell. Some stay because they have elderly relatives who can't move. And some stay because leaving requires money that Bogalusa doesn't generate anymore. Ask anyone from Washington Parish what they think about stopping in Bogalusa after dark, and the answer is consistent. You don't. You pass through. You keep your windows up and your doors locked, And if you need gas, you plan ahead. But Bogalusa is just the opening note. Here's a sentence you don't expect to read in a travel advisory for a town of 7,000 people. Padlock your picnic basket. That's not a joke. That's actual guidance that appears in safety analyses of Hartsville, South Carolina, a place where the total crime rate runs 211% above the national average, and the theft numbers are so persistent that published guides literally advise visitors to physically secure their belongings at local parks. Hartsville sits in Darlington County in the PD region of South Carolina. It's the kind of town that looks, on a satellite image, like a quiet southern community. Tree-lined streets, a small downtown, a few churches, a Coker University campus with brick buildings and neat lawns. There's even a modest cultural scene, the Center Theatre, the Hartsville Museum. On paper, it reads like a pleasant stop between Florence and Camden. On paper. The reality is that Hartsville has ranked in the top 5 most dangerous cities in South Carolina consistently across the 2021, 2022, and 2023 analysis cycles. The violent crime rate clocks in at approximately 1,746 per 100,000 residents. To put that in perspective, the national average hovers around 400. Hartsville is running more than 4 times that number, packed into a community where everybody theoretically knows everybody. There are roughly 2 burglaries per week, 10 thefts per week, in a town of 7,000. Think about that frequency for a moment. If you lived on a street with 30 houses, the statistical probability that one of those houses gets hit in any given month is not trivial. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when your number comes up. The economic underpinning tells the familiar story. Manufacturing jobs that once anchored the region have thinned out, poverty rates are elevated, and the proximity to Interstate 20, which should be an economic lifeline, instead functions as a corridor that brings transient crime without bringing proportional investment. The traffic passes through, the money doesn't stop. What makes Hartsville particularly unsettling for travellers is the normalcy of its appearance. It doesn't look dangerous. It looks like any other small southern town with a Dollar General and a Waffle House. And that gap between what your eyes tell you and what the FBI data says is exactly the kind of mismatch that gets people in trouble. You pull off the highway, you see a park, you think, this looks nice. You leave your car unlocked for 10 minutes, and you come back to broken glass and an empty seat where your bag used to be. The climate here is southeastern humid. Hot summers that push past 95 degrees with humidity that makes it feel like 110. Mild winters and a growing season that keeps the vegetation thick and green year-round. The PD River lowlands are flat, agricultural and unremarkable to drive through. You wouldn't stop here unless you needed something, and the locals would gently suggest you not need anything in the first place. The next stop is only 60 miles south on I-95. Same interstate, same state, different kind of predator. If you've driven the I-95 corridor between North Carolina and South Carolina, you've seen the signs for Dillon. Giant billboards advertising fireworks stores, outlet malls, and south of the border, that enormous, kitschy, sombrero-themed roadside attraction with the 200-foot tower and the neon signs that start appearing 100 miles north. Millions of East Coast travellers know Dillon's name without knowing anything else about it. Here's what else there is to know. The violent crime rate in Dillon runs approximately 1,873 per 100,000 residents. That's nearly 4 times the South Carolina state average, which is itself already above the national norm. Your statistical chance of being a crime victim in Dillon in any given year is roughly 1 in 11. I know that sounds like a number from a failed state. It's from a town with a Waffle House and a fireworks store, straddling one of the busiest interstate highways on the East Coast. The geography of the problem is straightforward. Dillon exists because I-95 runs through it. The interstate brings an enormous daily volume of travellers, truckers, families on vacation, snowbirds heading to Florida, college students driving to Myrtle Beach. They stop for gas, for food, for fireworks, for bathrooms. They stop with out-of-state plates, visible luggage, and the distracted body language of people who are thinking about their destination, not their current location. That makes Dillon a target-rich environment. Armed robberies, assaults, and property theft are concentrated around the truck stops and travel retail clusters along the interstate. After dark, the risk profile escalates significantly. Business security firms, the kind that issue travel protocols for employees, have produced specific written warnings about Dillon. The guidance is blunt. If your employees must stop in Dillon after dark, they should remain in their vehicles, keep doors locked, and refuel only at well-lit stations with visible security cameras. That is not standard advice for a small southern town. That is the kind of language you normally see in protocols for high-risk international deployments. Dillon's population has been slipping. The 2020 census counted 6,506 people, and the trajectory since has continued downward. The town's economy depends heavily on the transient dollar, the money that drivers spend as they pass through. But that dependency creates a paradox. The very traffic that funds Dillon's economy also funds its crime ecosystem. The travellers are both the lifeblood and the prey. The physical landscape around Dillon is flat coastal plain, tobacco fields, pine stands, swamp edges. Marion County stretches east toward the Pee Dee River. It's quiet agricultural country that provides no natural barriers, no topographic features that might funnel traffic or create defensible spaces. Everything is flat and open and exposed, which means the interstate corridor is the dominant geographic feature in every sense, economically, socially, and criminally. Here's the part that seals it. There is no part of Dillon's I-95 corridor that is reliably safe after sunset. The lighting is inconsistent, the security is inconsistent, and the crime patterns are not inconsistent. They are predictable, documented, and ongoing. If South Carolina's Pee Dee region is starting to feel like a place designed to extract something from you, money, property, or peace of mind, wait until we cross the state line heading north 6 times. Violent crime in Wadesboro, North Carolina, runs 600% above US norms. Total crime sits 347% above the national average, 10,385 incidents per 100,000 residents. Multiple state and national publications have labelled Wadesboro the single most dangerous city in North Carolina. The population? Roughly 4,960 people. And shrinking. Wadesboro is the county seat of Anson County, which means it has a courthouse, a small government apparatus, and the symbolic authority that comes with being the administrative centre of a rural county in the Carolina Piedmont. It also means that when Anson County's economy collapsed, textiles gone, manufacturing gone, agriculture mechanised to the point where it barely employs anyone, the seat of government became the seat of desperation. The courthouse stayed, the jobs didn't. The population peaked around 6,087 in the year 2000. Since then, it's been a steady bleed, young people leaving for Charlotte, which is only about 60 miles west, but might as well be on another planet in economic terms. Charlotte is growing, booming, building. Wadesboro is contracting, hollowing, losing. And here's the pattern that makes Wadesboro particularly alarming. As the population shrinks, the crime rate climbs. In inverse proportion. Fewer people, more crime per capita. It's a death spiral where the denominator keeps getting smaller and the numerator refuses to follow. The streets of Wadesboro tell the story without narration. Uptown Wadesboro, the historic district around the courthouse, has the bones of a once prosperous southern county seat. Brick commercial buildings from the early 20th century, a town square design that was built for a community that gathered, shopped, conducted business face to face. Now many of those storefronts are vacant, the sidewalks are empty at midday, the architecture is handsome and the silence is deafening. Anson County sits in the southern Piedmont, rolling terrain between the coastal plain and the foothills, red clay soil, mixed hardwood and pine forests. The Pee Dee River, which we keep encountering, forms the county's eastern boundary. It's beautiful country if you're flying over it. On the ground, the beauty is harder to appreciate when you're aware that the per capita crime rate exceeds that of cities 10 times Wadesboro's size. What kills any remaining hope for Wadesboro is that there is no economic engine on the horizon, no development project, no corporate relocation announcement, no tourism angle. Wadesboro is too small to attract institutional investment and too close to Charlotte for anyone to build something here when they could build it closer to the metro area. The town exists in a gravitational dead zone. close enough to a major city to lose its young people, too far to benefit from spillover growth. Residents who remain describe a community that is both tight-knit and tense. People know each other. They also know who's involved in what. The aggravated assault numbers suggest that much of the violence is interpersonal rather than random, but that doesn't mean a traveller is safe by virtue of being a stranger. Property crime doesn't discriminate, and a car with out-of-county plates sitting at a gas station is an invitation in a town where opportunities of any kind are scarce. The trajectory here is not improving. Each census brings a smaller number. Each year's crime data brings a higher rate. Wadesboro is proof that a county seat designation, a courthouse, and a historic downtown are not enough to hold a town together when the economic foundation is gone. Now let's jump to the industrial Midwest. The pattern looks different there, but the math is the same. There's a particular kind of warning that tells you more than any crime statistic can. In Muskegon Heights, Michigan, the warning doesn't come from the police department or from an FBI report. It comes from the residents of the neighbouring city of Muskegon, a separate municipality with its own government, its own school district, and its own identity, who actively warn outsiders not to confuse the two places. That's Muskegon Heights, they'll say. That's not us. When the town next door is worried about being associated with you, the reputation has achieved a kind of gravity that numbers alone can't convey. But let's talk numbers anyway. Muskegon Heights has been labelled Michigan's most violent city. Violent crime runs roughly 330% above the US average. There are approximately 48 crimes per 1,000 residents per year. Your annual chance of being a crime victim if you live in Muskegon Heights is approximately 1 in 19. The population tells the other half of the story. Around 1990, Muskegon Heights had upward of 13,000 residents. By 2026, that number has fallen below 10,000. 3,000 people, nearly a quarter of the town, left over 3 decades. They didn't leave because they found better weather somewhere. They left because the factories that had employed the town since the mid-20th century, auto parts suppliers, foundries, small manufacturers that fed the Michigan industrial machine, either closed, automated, or relocated. What remained was a residential grid built for an industrial workforce that no longer existed. Small bungalows on narrow lots, many of them now vacant. Commercial strips where the businesses have been replaced by boarded windows and faded signage. A school system that, at one point, was placed under emergency management. A state-appointed manager making decisions for a district that had run out of money and options simultaneously. Muskegon Heights sits on the eastern shore of Muskegon Lake, which connects to Lake Michigan. The irony is almost cruel. This is gorgeous Great Lakes country. Sand dunes to the west, the lakeshore that draws tourists from across the Midwest. Muskegon itself, the bigger city, has a waterfront that's been revitalized with breweries and parks and boat launches. But Muskegon Heights, just a few miles inland, exists in a parallel reality where the lake might as well be 1,000 miles away. The tourism money flows around it, not through it. What makes Muskegon Heights nearly impossible to recommend even for the most adventurous bargain hunter is that the municipal infrastructure is barely functional. For a period, the police department was disbanded entirely and replaced by contracted county sheriff patrols. Think about that. A city of nearly 10,000 people without its own police force. The services have been partially restored, but the trust hasn't been. Residents describe a place where response times are long, patrols are thin, and the gap between calling for help and receiving it can feel like a lifetime. Michigan winters compound everything. When temperatures drop below zero and the wind off Lake Michigan turns streets into ice corridors, the isolation becomes physical. Heating costs spike, pipes freeze in abandoned houses, and the people who are still here, the ones who couldn't leave or chose not to, hunker down and survive another season in a town that the rest of the state has mentally erased. Muskegon Heights is what happens when an American industrial town loses its industry and no one builds a replacement. The infrastructure crumbles, the population bleeds out, and the crime rate, perversely, becomes the town's most prominent feature, the only statistic that anyone outside Muskegon County remembers. But we haven't left the Midwest yet. The next stop is a suburb of Chicago, where the numbers defy logic. 55 violent crimes per 1,000 residents. Per year. In a village of under 10,000 people. That's Sauk Village, Illinois, a small municipality at the southern edge of Chicago's sprawling suburban ring, where the per capita violent crime rate exceeds that of most major American cities. Not most small towns, most major cities. Chicago itself, with all its gun violence headlines, runs lower per capita than Sauk Village, a village with a higher body count per capita than the city it's trying to escape. Sauk Village sits in Cook County, which means it shares a county government with Chicago, the third largest city in America. But Cook County is enormous, and its southern suburbs exist in a different universe from the Loop, the Gold Coast, or even the South Side neighborhoods that dominate the news. Sauk Village is about 30 miles south of downtown Chicago, straddling the Cook and Will County lines, accessible via I-394 and surrounded by other small south suburban communities like Stager, South Chicago Heights, and Sauk Trail. The town was developed primarily as post-war suburban housing, small single-family homes on modest lots, the kind of housing stock that was built in the 1950s and 1960s for working-class families who wanted a yard and a garage and a school that wasn't in the city. For a generation, it worked. The families were there, the jobs, in steel, in manufacturing, in the industrial belt that lined the southern rim of Lake Michigan, or within commuting distance. Sauk Village was what the American suburb was supposed to be. Then the jobs left, and unlike the wealthier suburbs farther north and west, Sauk Village didn't have the tax base, the corporate anchors, or the geographic advantage to attract replacements. What it had was cheap housing, which drew people priced out of everywhere else, and proximity to interstate highways, which brought traffic without commerce. The FBI data consistently flags Sauk Village on national lists of the most dangerous small towns in America. The violent crime rate, 55 per thousand, means that if you stood in a room with 100 Sauk Village residents, statistically, between 5 and 6 of them would be victims of a violent crime in the coming year. Not property crime, violent crime. Assault, robbery, the kind of crime that leaves marks. The honest drawback here is compounding decay. The municipal government has struggled with fiscal crises. Water quality issues have been documented. Infrastructure, roads, streetlights, sewer systems shows decades of deferred maintenance. The housing stock, now 60 to 70 years old, is deteriorating in ways that are expensive to fix and easy to ignore. For a traveller passing through, Sauk Village presents as a series of residential streets that look worn and quiet and unremarkable. The danger isn't visible in the architecture, it's visible in the statistics. And this is what makes Sauk Village different from the rural towns on this list. It's not isolated. It's not in the middle of nowhere. It's 30 miles from a world-class city. You can see the Chicago skyline on a clear day from the right elevation. The proximity should be an advantage. Instead, it's an indictment. The system that built the suburbs for a certain kind of American life also abandoned them when the economic model changed. Sauk Village isn't remote, it's forgotten. And there's a difference. Now we leave crime statistics behind entirely. The next town's danger doesn't carry a weapon. It's in the soil, it's in the air, and it's been killing people quietly for decades. 400 people. Dead. Not from crime, not from drugs, from breathing. Libby. Montana sits in the northwest corner of the state, in Lincoln County, tucked into a valley beneath the Cabinet Mountains. The Katini River winds through town. Forests of Douglas fir and western larch climb the ridgelines in every direction. It is, by every visual measure, one of the most beautiful settings in the American West, the kind of place that belongs on a postcard, that makes people say, "This is why I moved to Montana." And a mining company poisoned it for decades. The W.R. Grace Company operated a vermiculite mine just outside Libby for years, extracting a mineral used primarily as lightweight insulation. The problem, the lethal problem, was that Libby's vermiculite deposits were contaminated with tremolite asbestos. Not the kind of asbestos you see in brake pads, which is dangerous enough. Tremolite is a needle-like fibre that is among the most toxic forms of asbestos known to science. And W.R. Grace mined it, processed it, and shipped it out, while the dust, microscopic, invisible, and deadly, drifted over the town. The contamination wasn't limited to the mine site. That's what makes Libby's story different from a standard industrial disaster. The company gave away waste vermiculite to residents for use in gardens. The contaminated material was used in local construction. Most critically, it was used as attic insulation in homes throughout Libby. Residents were breathing tremolite asbestos fibres inside their own houses, in their bedrooms, in their children's rooms, for decades without knowing. The EPA eventually designated Libby a public health emergency, a classification so rare and so extreme that it had essentially no precedent at the scale it was applied here. More than 2,400 residents were diagnosed with asbestos-related disease. The confirmed death toll exceeds 400. In a town with a current population in the ballpark of 8,668, that means roughly 1 in every 20 residents has been diagnosed. 1 in 20. At a block party in Libby, statistically, multiple people in the yard are carrying asbestos-related disease in their lungs. The Superfund cleanup is still ongoing in 2026. Still. Workers in protective suits are still remediating properties, still removing contaminated soil, still testing homes. The mine closed. W.R. Grace filed for bankruptcy. A criminal case was pursued and resulted in acquittals. The people who made the decisions that led to 400 deaths walked away. The people who breathed the dust did not. The landscape around Libby is painfully gorgeous. The Cabinet Mountains wilderness to the south, Koocanusa Reservoir to the north, elk herds, grizzly bears, rivers full of cutthroat trout. If you didn't know the history, you'd think you'd found paradise. And that's the cruelest part of Libby's story. The danger was never visible. No crime scene tape, no shattered windows, just a fine dust that settled on everything and everyone, and a company that knew what it was doing and did it anyway. What Libby can't escape in 2026 is that the contamination legacy creates a permanent asterisk. Even properties that have been remediated carry the stigma. The real estate market is suppressed, not because the town isn't beautiful, it is, but because buyers know the history and wonder what's still in the soil that hasn't been tested yet. The psychological toll on long-term residents is documented and heavy. This is a community that watched its neighbours die slowly, that attended funerals for people who had done nothing wrong except live in a beautiful valley and breathe the air. Don't Stop for Gas takes on a different meaning in Libby. It's not about what someone might do to you, it's about what the air already did. But none of the above compares to what happened, and is still happening, in the coalfields of southern West Virginia. 20.8 million pills. Not aspirin, not vitamins, hydrocodone and oxycodone. Schedule II controlled substances, the most addictive legal narcotics manufactured in America. Shipped to 2 pharmacies in a single town between 2008 and 2015. The town is Williamson, West Virginia. Population, roughly 3,083 people. Let me do the arithmetic for you so there's no ambiguity. 20.8 million pills divided by approximately 3,000 residents. That's approximately 6,500 pills per man, woman, and child. Every one of them, including infants, including the elderly, including people who never took a single pill in their lives. I know that sounds like a data error. It's not. It comes from a US House of Representatives investigation that subpoenaed the Drug Enforcement Administration's own records. Williamson is the county seat of Mingo County, deep in the coalfields of southern West Virginia, along the Tug Fork of the Big Sandy River, the same river that marks the West Virginia-Kentucky border. The town sits in a narrow valley between steep forested ridges, accessible primarily by US Route 52 and Route 119. The geography matters because it explains both the history and the trap. These valleys were built on coal. The coal companies dug the mines, built the towns, ran the company stores, and employed everyone. When the coal economy contracted, as it has been doing for decades, the jobs evaporated. But the people stayed. They stayed because they owned houses they couldn't sell. They stayed because the mountains are home. They stayed because leaving Appalachia requires resources that Appalachian poverty doesn't provide. Into that vacuum of economic despair came the pharmaceutical industry. And not the pharmaceutical industry as it presents itself in television commercials. Smiling families, soft focus, butterflies. The pharmaceutical industry as it actually operated in southern West Virginia. A pipeline of narcotics flowing from manufacturers, through distributors, through pharmacies, into the bloodstreams of people who were in pain. Physical pain from decades of manual labor in mines, emotional pain from watching their communities collapse, and who were told by doctors, by pharmacists, by the system itself, that these pills were the answer. 2 pharmacies in a town of 3,000, receiving enough opioids to supply a city of 100,000 for years. The congressional investigation that documented this pipeline revealed that the drug distributors, massive publicly traded companies, had legal obligations to flag suspicious orders. They didn't. The DEA had legal authority to shut down the pipeline. It didn't. The State Pharmacy Board had oversight responsibility. It didn't act with anything approaching urgency. Every institutional safeguard that was supposed to prevent this specific scenario failed. Not randomly, systematically. The physical reality of Williamson in 2026 is a town that has been through a war that most Americans watched on the news without understanding. The opioid crisis in Mingo County didn't just kill people, and it killed many people. It rewired the social fabric. Families fractured. Children were raised by grandparents because their parents were dead or incarcerated or in treatment. The foster care system in West Virginia was overwhelmed by the downstream effects. Property values cratered because who wants to buy a house in a town that's been on 60 Minutes for all the wrong reasons? There are people in Williamson doing genuine work to rebuild. Recovery programs, farmers markets, community initiatives. But you can't ship 20 million addictive pills into a town of 3,000 and expect the consequences to resolve in a decade. The cemetery doesn't forget. The honest drawback, and I hesitate to even frame it that way because the word drawback feels obscene in this context, is that Williamson's reputation precedes it permanently. The congressional investigation, the media coverage, the lawsuits, they documented the truth, which was necessary, but they also branded a community in a way that makes recovery exponentially harder. Who invests in a town that the national media calls a pill mill capital? Who moves there voluntarily? The people who live in Williamson didn't choose this. It was done to them by companies headquartered in other states, regulated by agencies in Washington, and distributed by corporations that are still in business today. The warning here isn't about carjacking or theft. The warning is about a system that turned a community into a market, a captive market with no alternatives, no oversight, and no recourse, and then moved on to the next profit center when the lawsuits started. But Williamson isn't even the most extreme example. That distinction belongs to a place just down the road in the same county, and the numbers there broke every scale anyone had ever built. 317 people. That is the population of Kermit, West Virginia. It's a town you could walk across in under 10 minutes, a cluster of houses and a few buildings along the Tug Fork in Mingo County. The same county as Williamson, the same coalfield valleys, the same economic collapse, the same pharmaceutical pipeline. But the numbers in Kermit aren't just worse. They are, by documented measurement, the most extreme pill-mill ratio ever recorded in the United States of America. 12 million prescription opioid pills were delivered to Kermit between 2006 and 2012. 12 million. To a town of 317. That's approximately 33,000 pills per resident over 7 years. You might think that's a typo. You might think I misplaced a decimal point. I didn't. 33,000 pills per person. In a place where you could knock on every single door in an afternoon. There is no medical scenario, no legitimate therapeutic framework, no conceivable explanation that justifies delivering 33,000 doses of controlled narcotics per resident to any community on Earth. The Save Right Pharmacy in Kermit was the primary conduit. One pharmacy. In a town that could fit inside a single apartment building in any major city. The pills came from distributors, the same distributors feeding Williamson, the same pipeline, the same failure of every regulatory checkpoint that was designed to prevent exactly this. The DEA's own data showed the orders, the wholesalers processed them, the pharmacy dispensed them, and people came from across the region, not just from Kermit, but from surrounding counties, from across the Kentucky border, to fill prescriptions that should never have been written, for drugs that should never have been shipped in those quantities to a location that size. Kermit became, in the language of the opioid crisis, a pill destination. The town's single pharmacy functioned as a distribution hub for a region's addiction. People drove hours to reach it. They lined up, they filled their prescriptions, they drove away. And the pills that didn't get consumed locally were resold, on the street, in parking lots, across state lines, at markups that turned a pharmaceutical product into a currency more reliable than the dollar in these hollows. The physical setting of Kermit is Appalachian to its core. A narrow valley, a river, steep ridges covered in second-growth hardwoods, oak, hickory, poplar, that were logged a century ago, grew back, and now form a canopy so dense that sunlight barely reaches the valley floor in summer. The road into Kermit follows the river, winding through curbs that were cut into the hillside decades ago for coal trucks. There's no highway access, no interstate. Getting to Kermit requires intention. You don't accidentally pass through Kermit on your way to somewhere else. You go to Kermit because Kermit is where you're going, and that geographic isolation is both the explanation and the indictment. Kermit is the kind of place that the regulatory system could ignore because no one important was watching. No one in Washington was tracking prescription volume against population in a town of 300. The formula was simple: small town, remote location, minimal oversight, maximum profit. The distributors knew, the pharmacy knew, and the system that was supposed to protect these people was either complicit or incompetent, and the practical result is the same either way. What does Kermit look like in 2026? It looks like what you'd expect a town of 300 to look like after absorbing 12 million opioid pills through a single pharmacy. The population has declined. It was around 400 at one point, and the trend is downward. The economic base that existed before the pills was already fragile. After the pills, after the addiction, after the deaths, after the incarceration, after the children placed in foster care, after the national media attention that branded this community forever, what's left is a place that exists primarily as a cautionary tale. There is no silver lining in Kermit. There is no tourism angle. There is no cheap land bargain to pitch. There is no hidden gem narrative to spin. Kermit is a place where a system designed to maximize pharmaceutical profit identified the most vulnerable population it could find, isolated, poor, in physical pain, with zero institutional protection, and extracted everything it could before the lawsuits caught up. The people of Kermit are not statistics. They are Americans who lived in a place where the system decided their suffering was a market opportunity. And if you're driving through Mingo County and you think about stopping in Kermit to see what it looks like, to put a real place to the numbers, ask yourself what you're looking at. You're looking at 300 people who were used as inventory in a supply chain that ended in death, addiction, and permanent community destruction. The gas station isn't the danger. The danger already happened. And it happened because nobody with the power to stop it thought Kermit was worth protecting. That leaves one more town on this list, and it brings us back to where most people's vacations begin, the highway to the Florida Keys. Every year, millions of tourists drive through Florida City, Florida. They don't plan to, they don't want to, but geography forces it. Florida City sits at the southern tip of the Florida mainland, the last municipality before the overseas highway, US Route 1, launches across the chain of bridges and islands that lead to Key Largo, Isla Mirada, Marathon, and eventually Key West. It's the gateway, the bottleneck, the place where the road to paradise requires you to pass through something that is, by every measurable standard, the opposite. Florida City has the highest violent crime rate among Florida cities, with a population over 10,000. In the 2023 FBI Uniform Crime Report cycle, the city recorded 293 violent crimes, including 8 murders, 55 robberies, and 214 aggravated assaults. The violent crime rate works out to approximately 2,291 per 100,000 residents. The population is in the ballpark of 13,150. Those numbers mean that Florida City, a town that exists primarily as a waypoint for vacationers, is statistically one of the most dangerous places in a state that already ranks among the highest in the nation for violent crime. And the people most likely to become victims? the ones who look most like tourists. Carjackings and robberies targeting tourists, RV drivers, and rental car operators are specifically documented in Florida City's crime profile. Think about the victim profile. Someone in a rental car with luggage visible through the windows, out-of-state plates or rental agency stickers, a GPS mounted on the dashboard, maps on the phone, the body language of someone navigating unfamiliar territory. These are people whose attention is on directions, not on their surroundings. And Florida City's criminal element has adapted to that vulnerability with precision. Travel guides, published, reputable travel guides, and YouTube channels dedicated to Florida road trips explicitly name Florida City as the town where you fill up your gas tank before you arrive or after you leave, never while you're there. That's the phrase that shows up again and again. Get gas and keep moving. When the recommendation for a town is identical to the advice you'd give someone driving through a natural disaster area, the reputation has become its own kind of infrastructure, as real and as permanent as the road itself. The geography of Florida City amplifies the problem. The town is flat, South Florida flat, which means sea level flat, no hills, no elevation, nothing but sprawl extending west toward the Everglades and south toward the Keys. The urban layout is a grid of strip malls, gas stations, fast food outlets and budget motels that cater to people who arrive too late to make it to the Keys or who are looking for a cheaper overnight than anything available on the islands. That overnight stay is where the risk concentrates. Budget motels with exterior corridors, poorly lit parking lots, and no security presence become the setting for a disproportionate number of the robberies and assaults that drive Florida City's statistics. The irony that Florida City can never escape is that the town cannot escape its geography. Florida City will always be the last stop before the Keys. Millions of people will always drive through, and the economic structure of the town, budget lodging, gas stations, fast food, convenience stores, will always attract a transient population that is uniquely vulnerable to crime. The town's economy depends on people stopping, and the town's crime statistics are generated by people stopping. It's the same paradox as Dillon, South Carolina, but amplified by Florida's climate, Florida's gun laws, Florida's drug trafficking corridors, and the sheer volume of tourist traffic heading south. Ask the locals, the people who actually live in Florida City year-round, who raise kids there, who work there, and you'll hear two things. First, they'll tell you the crime is real and the warnings are justified. Second, they'll tell you that they wish the town was known for something else, anything else. But when your most prominent feature on the national map is a warning, don't stop for gas, changing the narrative requires more than good intentions. It requires the kind of investment that doesn't flow toward places with 2,200 violent crimes per 100,000 residents. Florida City is where this list ends. Not because it's the most extreme by any single metric, but because it's the most visible. Millions of Americans will drive through it this year. Most of them won't know the statistics. They'll see the gas stations and the fast food signs and the turnoff for the overseas highway, and they'll think they're in a normal town at the edge of a tropical vacation. And if they stop, if they linger, some of them will learn, the hard way, why every local they could have asked would have told them the same thing. Keep driving. A town of 300 that absorbed 33,000 opioid pills per resident, and a gateway to the Keys where published travel guides tell you to never stop for gas. 10 zip codes, 10 different mechanisms: crime, contamination, pharmaceuticals, systemic abandonment, and one common thread. The warning was always there, buried in data that no one puts on a billboard. The question isn't whether these places are real, it's how many more like them exist on roads you drive every year without thinking twice. Which of these 10 would make you reroute your next road trip? Drop it in the comments, I genuinely want to know. And if this is the kind of content that's useful to you, the stuff that doesn't show up in your Maps app, subscribe. There are more roads to cover, and not all of them are safe.